My wife told me to hand over my 8-year-old daughter's trust fund. Her mom backed her up. You're just her father. We know what's best. I said nothing. The next morning, I handed them an envelope from my lawyer. When they read it, my wife started crying, and her mom went pale. But before I begin, please like and subscribe to the channel. And we'd love to hear which part of the world are you joining us from. Let us know. Now, let's dive into today's story. The Callahan house sat on Birchwood Drive, in a part of Knoxville where the lawns were kept and the neighbors still waved from their driveways. On most mornings, a visitor driving past would see nothing unusual. A modest two-story with cream siding, a dogwood tree in the front yard, a bicycle leaning against the porch rail. Nothing that said trouble lived here. Nothing that suggested the inside of that house had been quietly coming apart for months. Andrew Callahan stood at the kitchen sink and watched his daughter pack her school bag. Mary was 9 years old, and she had her mother's dark eyes and her father's stubborn jaw. She had also, in the last 2 months, developed a habit that Andrew couldn't stop noticing. Every morning, before she zipped her bag, she lined up her pencils in the front pocket, sharpest to bluntest, point facing up. Then she checked the zipper. Then she checked it again. Then a third time, running her thumb along the teeth, pressing the pull tab until it clicked against the stopper. She never used to do that. Andrew kept his voice easy. Hey, you're good, kiddo. Everything's in there. Mary looked up. She nodded, that quick, obedient nod that meant she'd heard him but wasn't quite convinced. Then she went back to her bag and pressed the zipper one more time. He turned back to the sink, rinsing the last of the breakfast mugs. The water ran warm over his knuckles. Outside the window, a blue jay landed on the fence post and just as quickly left. The house had a particular sound to it in the mornings, a kind of pressurized quiet, the kind you get when people have stopped saying the things they actually mean and have started measuring every word before it leaves their mouths. He had been married to Pauline for 11 years. The first 7 had been fine, not perfect, not extraordinary, but the kind of solid, ordinary life that a person could build something on. They had dated in their mid-20s, married at 29, bought the house on Birchwood Drive when Pauline was pregnant with Mary. They had disagreed about things the way any couple does, and they had worked through most of those disagreements the way functional people do. Imperfectly and without much grace, but honestly. That version of their life had ended the day Colleen Voss moved in. Mary. Pauline's voice came from the living room, carrying the sharpness she never bothered to soften before noon. Don't forget your lunch. Food costs money, you know. It wasn't a joke. Pauline never made jokes about money. She made observations about money the way other people make observations about weather. Constant, unasked for, and carrying the faint suggestion that you were somehow responsible for the forecast. Andrew set the mug on the drying rack and dried his hands. He didn't say anything. From the couch in the living room, Colleen Voss, Pauline's mother, shifted against the cushions with a sound like a door with a stiff hinge. She'd been living with them for 4 months. In 4 months, Andrew had never once heard her offer to help with the dishes, never heard her ask whether he'd eaten, never seen her rise from that couch for any reason that wasn't her own comfort or her own agenda. She had 2 modes in this house, passive observation and pointed comment. This morning, she chose the second. Some people don't understand how to manage what they have, Colleen said. She was looking at the television, but she wasn't watching it. She was performing looking at the television, the way she performed most things. Andrew knew who that sentence was aimed at. It was always aimed at him. He'd grown up in a family where money was tight and silence was the only dignified response to it. You either found a solution or you kept your mouth shut. He made a decent living in logistics coordination, stable work, nothing glamorous. He paid the mortgage on time. He kept the lights on and the refrigerator full and the car maintained. He had 3 years ago set up an education trust for Mary with the help of a financial advisor, putting money in every month, slow and steady, the way his own father had taught him that anything worth having gets built. His father had worked in a sheet metal shop for 31 years. He had never once complained about it. He had put Andrew and his sister through school and paid off his own house and died at 72 with a modest savings account and no debt. Andrew kept that man in his head the way some people keep a compass, not for sentiment but for direction. Colleen Voss had no interest in slow and steady. Colleen Voss had debts. Mary shouldered her bag and came into the kitchen to get her lunchbox from the refrigerator. Andrew crouched down to her level as she looked at him with those careful eyes. He noticed, not for the first time, how watchful she'd become. 9-year-olds weren't supposed to be watchful. They were supposed to be noisy and distracted and perpetually running late. Mary was none of those things anymore. "Have a good one," he said. "Okay, Dad. I mean it." Something loosened in her face, just slightly, just enough. She gave him a real smile, small and quick, and then she was gone through the front door, and Andrew could hear Pauline calling after her about remembering her sweater. He stood back up and looked at the empty kitchen. He had the feeling, not for the first time, that something was tightening in this house. Not loudly, not in any single obvious way, but the way a knot tightens gradually, invisibly, under steady pressure, until one day the rope either holds or it doesn't. The argument that evening started the way most of their arguments started these days, with a demand that Pauline had already decided she was entitled to, delivered at the dinner table like a bill left on a counter. They had finished eating. Mary was upstairs doing homework. The television was on in the living room, muted, filling the background with silent, shifting light. Colleen sat at the far end of the dining table, her hands around a cup of tea, watching the two of them with the composed attention of someone who has already chosen a side. "I want access to Mary's trust," Pauline said. She didn't ease into it. She didn't say, "I've been thinking," or "Can we talk about something?" She just stated it, the way you state a fact that should already be obvious to everyone in the room. Andrew looked up from the table. He set down his glass and looked at her across the dishes and the cold serving bowls. He took a breath. "No," he said. Colleen made a sound in her throat, something more dismissive than a scoff, the sound of a teacher listening to a student give a wrong answer that she'd expected. "You're being stubborn," she said. Andrew didn't look at her. He kept his eyes on Pauline. "It's not our money. It's Mary's. For her future. That's the only reason it exists." Pauline's expression shifted. Not hurt. She was past hurt. He could see that. This was something harder. This was a woman who had decided what she wanted and was recalibrating how to get it. "We are her future," she said. "We provide for her. If we're struggling, that affects her directly." "How do you not see that?" "I see it," Andrew said. "And that's still not what that money is for. That money is sitting in an account, doing nothing while we—" "It's growing," Andrew said. "Every month it grows. That's not nothing." Pauline shoved her chair back slightly. The legs scraped across the tile floor. "We have bills, Andrew. We have debt." "Your debt," he said. "Or your mother's?" The silence that followed was the kind that has weight to it. Colleen set her teacup down on the table. The sound of ceramic on wood was precise and deliberate. "You're just her father," she said. Her voice was controlled, and even the voice of someone who had decided that the most cutting thing she could do was remain calm while the people around her were not. "You know how to set aside money and call it responsible. You don't know how to grow it. You don't know how to use it. You sit on it because you don't have the courage to make real decisions with it." Andrew turned and looked at her then, really looked at her, the way he rarely did, because looking at Colleen directly usually only gave her more to work with. She met his stare without blinking. "I know how to keep it safe," he said, "which is what it needs right now." "Safe." She smiled thinly. "Safe is what people say when they're afraid of the world." Andrew didn't answer that. He turned back to Pauline. "We've been through hard stretches before," he said. "We get through them. We cut where we have to cut. We pick up extra work where we can. That's how it works." "This isn't a hard stretch," Pauline said. Her voice rose. "This is my mother's credit situation, and her lease, and the medical bills she can't pay, and we're watching it happen, and you're sitting there telling me we can't touch a fund that won't even be used for 10 years. "It won't be touched for 10 years because that's the entire point of it," Andrew said. Pauline stood up. She pushed her plate aside, and her voice cracked open with the force behind it. "We have bills. My mother has real debt. Collections calling the house every other day, and that money could fix everything. All of it, in one move. And you're protecting a fund for a college that's still a decade away while this family drowns right now." Andrew went still. He let the words settle. He turned them over in his mind, one by one. and found the core of what Pauline had just revealed without meaning to. Not, it would help Mary. Not, we pay it back. Not even, it's only a temporary measure. Just fix everything. Fix Colleen's bills. Solve the immediate crisis using a fund that belonged to a 9-year-old girl who checked her zipper 3 times every morning because something in her environment had taught her that things slip away when you don't hold on tight. No, Andrew said. He said it once, evenly, and he didn't raise his voice, and he didn't soften it with anything that came after it. He stood up from the table, carried his plate to the sink, and didn't come back to the dining room that night. Upstairs, Mary's bedroom light was on under the door. He paused outside it for a moment, listening. He could hear the faint, steady sound of her working. Pencil on paper, a page turning. He stood there for a long time before he went to bed. He lay awake. He watched the ceiling and listened to the house. Downstairs, he could hear Pauline and Colleen talking, low, fast, the kind of conversation that isn't meant to carry. He didn't try to make out the words. He didn't need to. He thought about Pauline the way you sometimes think about someone when things are bad enough that the distance makes the earlier version of them visible again. He thought about when they'd first moved into this house, before Mary was born, before Colleen, before the pressure had started accumulating into something that changed the shape of everything. Pauline had been different then, warmer. She'd had a kind of easy, forward-moving energy that Andrew had admired, the way she engaged with the world directly and without hesitation. She'd been the person who suggested things, started things, called her friends on a random Tuesday, because she felt like it. He didn't know exactly when that had changed. He tried to locate the moment over the last year and couldn't find it. It wasn't a single event. It was more like a tide, gradual, steady, and by the time he noticed how far it had come in, the ordinary geography of things was already different. What he did know was that wherever Pauline had gone, she'd taken a part of their marriage with her. And what had filled the space, the pressure and the resentment and the logic that said a child's money was a resource rather than a protection, that was something he couldn't accommodate. Not because he didn't understand the difficulty of it. He understood pressure. He'd lived under pressure his whole adult life. But understanding a difficulty was not the same as accepting what people did in response to it. He knew what kind of family he was living in now. He'd known it for a while. He'd just been slow to admit what that knowledge required of him. 2 days later, Andrew picked Mary up from school. She got into the car the way she always did, backpack first, then herself, then door, but something was different. He caught it before she'd even buckled her seatbelt. Her movements were slower than usual. Not tired slow, more careful slow, the way you move when you're holding something still inside you. "How was school?" he asked. "Fine." She looked out the window. He pulled out of the school lot and drove without pushing it. Sometimes she needed a few minutes. Sometimes the 10-minute drive home was enough to let things surface on their own. The radio was off. The car hummed over the pavement. A yellow school bus pulled out ahead of them, and Andrew slowed behind it, unhurried. 3 blocks from the house, she spoke. "Dad, yeah." A pause. He kept his eyes on the road. "Grandma said I should take something, so I don't feel nervous at school." Andrew's hands didn't tighten on the wheel. He made a deliberate choice to stay easy. "Yeah," he said. "What did she mean by that?" "She gave me something this morning, before you got up." Mary's voice was matter-of-fact. The way children's voices are when they're reporting something they've been told is normal. "She said it would help me concentrate. She said I've been having a hard time, and this would help." "What did she give you?" "I don't know. A small white pill." She put it on the counter with a glass of water. The world outside the windshield kept moving. Traffic lights, storefronts, a woman walking a dog. But something inside Andrew's chest became very still. Not tense. Still. The way a room goes quiet before a sound that changes something. "Did your mom know?" he asked. Mary nodded. "She was in the kitchen when Grandma gave it to me. She said it was fine. She said Grandma used to give her stuff like that when she was little and it never hurt anyone." Andrew didn't speak for the last 2 blocks. He parked in the driveway and sat for a moment with the engine off, looking at the garage door. Then he said, quietly, "Thanks for telling me, Mary." "Is it bad?" she asked. "No," he said. "You didn't do anything wrong. You did the right thing. Come on inside." He made her an after-school snack, apple slices and peanut butter, and watched her settle at the kitchen table with her homework. He watched her the way he hadn't watched her since she was a toddler learning to walk, closely, looking for anything that wasn't right. Her color was fine. Her speech was normal. She laughed once at something in her book. She seemed okay, but he didn't know what she'd been given. He didn't know the dosage. He didn't know if she'd been given it before. If last week's unusual sleepiness at dinner had been the same thing, or the Thursday 2 weeks ago when she'd fallen asleep on the couch before 7 o'clock and he'd carried her to bed thinking she was just tired. He didn't know, and that was the thing that had taken up residence behind his sternum and wasn't going to leave. That evening, Colleen was in the kitchen when he came downstairs after helping Mary with her reading. She was making tea, her back to him, moving through the kitchen with the easy ownership of someone who has decided it belongs to her. Mary seemed more settled today, Colleen said, without turning around. I've been worried about her anxiety. She's been too tightly wound. Andrew stood in the doorway and looked at her. Children get overwhelmed, Colleen continued, opening the cabinet for the honey. A little help now and then isn't the end of the world. My doctor recommended this same thing for me years ago when I was under stress, and it made all the difference. I thought don't, Andrew said. Just the one word. Colleen went quiet. You do not give my daughter medication, Andrew said. His voice stayed flat and measured. You do not give her anything without telling me. Not vitamins. Not supplements. Not a piece of candy she didn't ask for. Nothing. Colleen turned around now. The pleasantness was gone from her expression, replaced by something that was trying to decide between genuine offense and damage control. It was completely harmless, she said. I've taken it myself for years. That's not the same thing, Andrew said. You don't know her physiology. You don't know how a child's body processes what an adult body processes differently. And more importantly, you didn't ask me. You made a decision about my daughter's body, and you didn't ask me. I was trying to help her, Colleen said. You were doing what you decided was right without consulting the person who has the right to decide, Andrew said. That's not helping. He left the kitchen. He went upstairs and sat on the edge of the bed in the dark for a long time. This wasn't anger. He'd expected anger to come, and it had arrived and passed through him very quickly, the way it sometimes does when something happens that's serious enough to cut through the usual noise. What was left behind was something different, something that didn't need to be maintained or managed, something colder and more useful. He thought about Mary's zipper, the way she checked it 3 times every morning, the way she nodded at him like she wanted to believe him but needed him to say it again. He thought about a 9-year-old girl being handed a pill at the kitchen counter before her father was even awake, with her mother standing right there saying it was fine. He thought about the trust conversation, Pauline's voice cracking open with the truth of it, the debts, the collections callers, the logic that said a child's future was a resource to be harvested for the present. He thought about what kind of home this had become and what kind of man he intended to be in it. He sat there long enough for the house to go fully quiet around him, for Colleen's light to go off down the hall, and for Pauline to come upstairs and close their bedroom door without a word, and for the furnace to cycle on and off twice. He sat in the dark, and he let himself be certain. He thought about his father, not a memory of any specific event, just the shape of the man, the steadiness of someone who understood that the most important things a person does are rarely the ones anyone sees. His father had not been a man of speeches or gestures. He had been a man of consistent, unremarkable days. Andrew had grown up thinking that was ordinary. It had taken years to understand that it was rare. What he needed to do was not complicated. It was hard. There was a difference, and it would require him to move carefully and without noise, and to be the kind of person who does what needs doing without waiting for a version of events that makes it easier. He had never been good at waiting for easier. Not anger. Clarity. The next morning, Andrew was up before anyone else in the house. He stood in the kitchen in the early gray light, making coffee, and he thought clearly and without urgency about what the day needed to look like. There was no version of this that involved confrontation. Not yet. There was a sequence of things that needed to happen in order, without noise, and the first thing on that list had nothing to do with lawyers or documents or any kind of strategy. The first thing was making sure his daughter was all right. He woke Mary at 7:30, same as always. He told her they were going to make a quick stop before school. He kept his tone light, the way you do when you need a child to feel safe about something they haven't asked questions about yet. She came downstairs with her hair still slightly messy, pulling on her shoes at the bottom of the stairs while he poured orange juice into a travel cup for her. "Is it the doctor?" she asked. "A clinic. Just to check in. Make sure everything's working right." She looked at him over the tops of her shoes. "Am I sick?" "No, kiddo. I just want someone to look you over. It's quick." She accepted this the way she accepted most things Andrew told her, with a small nod and a trust he tried to be worthy of every single day. The clinic was a family practice office on Millbrook Road, the kind of place with framed photos of hiking trails in the waiting room and a fish tank by the front desk that made a low, constant hum. The receptionist was efficient without being rushed. The wait was 20 minutes. Andrew sat beside Mary in the plastic waiting room chairs and read a book about a bear family that he pulled from the children's basket in the corner. Mary watched the fish. Dr. Renata Okafor came in with a notepad and an easy way of talking to children. Direct but warm, the kind of doctor who made eye contact with her youngest patients and didn't speak past them to their parents unless the situation required it. She asked Mary a few questions about how she'd been feeling. Sleeping, eating, whether her stomach ever hurt at school. Mary answered carefully, honestly. Then Dr. Okafor turned her attention to Andrew. "Has she been given any medication recently? Anything outside of what we have on file?" "Yes," Andrew said. "Yesterday morning. A white pill. Given to her by a family member without my knowledge and without a prescription." Dr. Okafor's manner didn't shift dramatically. She was the kind of doctor who had learned to receive information without performing a reaction to it. She made a note. "Do you know what it was?" "No." She looked at him steadily. "Children metabolize compounds differently than adults. They're more sensitive to certain substances, and a dose calibrated for an adult can have unpredictable effects in a child, particularly if there are any underlying sensitivities you're not aware of." She paused. Giving a child an unknown substance without a prescription and without the primary parent's consent is something that warrants medical attention. "I'm glad you brought her in. What do you need from us?" Andrew asked. "I want to run a basic panel. It's routine. I'll have results by tomorrow. If anything comes back that concerns me, I'll call you directly." She looked at him for a moment. "Is she in a safe situation at home right now?" Andrew thought about the house on Birchwood Drive, about Colleen in the kitchen reaching for the honey jar, about Pauline standing at the stove and watching it happen and saying it was fine. "She will be," he said. Dr. Okafor nodded once. She finished her examination of Mary, checked her reflexes, her blood pressure, her heart rate, and she was gentle about all of it, and Mary sat on the paper-covered table and swung her feet slightly, which was a good sign. Andrew dropped her at school 20 minutes late. The attendance secretary gave him a form to sign. He signed it, handed it back, and walked back to his car in the school parking lot. The morning had gone pale and overcast. A group of third graders was filing out to the playground at the far end of the building, their voices carrying thinly across the asphalt. He watched them for a moment. Then he put the car in gear and drove across town to meet his lawyer. Neil Harcourt had been Andrew's attorney for about 4 years. Andrew had found him through a referral during a contract dispute with a former employer, a situation that had looked manageable on the surface and turned out to be significantly less manageable under it. Harcourt had handled it without drama and without billing hours he hadn't earned, and Andrew had kept his number ever since. He was in his mid-50s, with wireframe glasses and an office that smelled like coffee and paper and the particular kind of quiet that accumulates in rooms where difficult conversations happen regularly. He had a quality Andrew valued above most things in a professional. He did not waste time, and he did not soften what needed to be said. Andrew sat across from him at the desk and laid it out in order. The trust demand. The escalating pressure from Pauline and Colleen over the last several months. The dynamic in the house. The pill. The clinic visit that morning. Harcourt listened. He made a few notes. He asked one clarifying question. Was the medication given with Pauline's knowledge and approval? Mary said Pauline told her it was fine. She was in the kitchen when it happened. Harcourt set down his pen. He leaned back in his chair, and Andrew watched him think. The careful, lateral thinking of a person who lives in precedent and evidence, who has learned not to respond to information until he's looked at it from every angle. "All right," Harcourt said. "Let me be direct with you. Taken individually, some of these things are serious but complicated to act on. A spouse demanding access to a child's trust is aggressive, but not by itself illegal. However, the medication incident changes the picture considerably. A child administered an unknown substance without a prescription, without the knowledge or consent of the custodial parent, with evidence that the other parent was present and approving. And this happening in the context of demonstrated financial pressure and a history of attempts to access the child's assets. That builds a case. A real one. What does filing look like? Andrew asked. An emergency custody petition. A simultaneous motion to freeze access to Mary's trust pending a court review. Both filed this week. Harcourt turned a page in his notepad. Once those are filed, Family Services gets involved. A caseworker will want to speak with Mary. They'll speak with Pauline and with Colleen separately. The medical documentation from the clinic will be central. Make sure Dr. Okafor's office sends her records directly to me. Already requested this morning. Good. Harcourt looked at him. I also want to tell you clearly what filing means beyond the procedural. This is not reversible in the short term. Once you start a custody modification process, you're in a legal proceeding. It will affect your relationship with Pauline. It will affect Mary's experience of both her parents for a period of time. The process itself will be uncomfortable. He paused. I'm not saying this to discourage you. I'm saying it because I want you to go into this with open eyes. I understand what I'm doing, Andrew said. And you're sure? Andrew thought about Mary sitting in the car the afternoon before. The careful way she'd said, I don't know, a small white pill, as though she'd been carrying the information for a day and hadn't been sure whether she was allowed to put it down. He thought about Pauline standing in the kitchen, saying it was fine. He thought about the trust conversation at the dinner table, Pauline's voice cracking open with a real purpose behind it. Not Mary's future, but Colleen's debt, Colleen's rent, Colleen's callers. I'm sure, he said. Harcourt nodded once, and that was enough. I'll start drafting today. I should have the petition ready by tomorrow morning. He picked up his pen. In the meantime, go home. Act normal. Help Mary with her homework. Eat dinner at the table. Don't tell Pauline or Colleen what's coming. The documented pattern of behavior before they have any opportunity to adjust their conduct is part of what gives us a strong filing. Andrew nodded. One more thing, Harcourt said. This is about Mary. Keep it about Mary. Whatever is happening between you and Pauline, whatever your feelings are about Colleen, that's secondary. The moment this case is about your marriage, we lose clarity. The moment it's about Mary's safety, we have a clear argument. It's always been about Mary, Andrew said. He drove back to Birchwood Drive. He pulled into the driveway and sat in the car for a minute before going in, looking at the house from the outside. The cream siding, the dogwood tree, the bicycle still leaning against the porch. It looked like a home. He went inside and made dinner. Nothing elaborate, pasta with a jar sauce and some garlic bread, and he helped Mary with her multiplication tables while the bread was in the oven. She had a test on Friday, the 10s and 11s, and she kept confusing 11 times 12 with 12 times 11, which made Andrew smile internally even as he corrected her for the third time. They're the same number, kiddo. I know, but it doesn't feel like it. Math doesn't care about feelings, he said. And she made a sound of theatrical disgust that was so entirely 9 years old that he had to look at his paper to keep from laughing. Pauline was in a lighter mood that evening. She talked about a sale at a clothing store she liked. She laughed at something on the television. She made tea and asked if Andrew wanted a cup, and he said yes, and he sat with her on the couch and watched a show that neither of them was really watching. He held the cup with both hands and said the right things at the right moments and felt the quiet weight of what was coming. And he held that too. He had learned, in the years of his marriage, how to be still in a way that looked like ease. It was one of those skills you develop without meaning to, out of simple necessity. He'd used it in difficult meetings and in arguments that needed cooling and in the long, careful days after his father got sick. It had never felt like dishonesty. It felt like discipline. This was discipline. The 2 days that followed were the most ordinary days Andrew could remember. That was by design. He came home on time. He helped with dinner. He sat with Mary while she did homework. He answered Pauline's questions about his day with the kind of brief, honest answers that didn't invite follow-up. He was present, and gave nothing away. He had discovered, over the past several years, that he was capable of this kind of stillness, that the part of him which had grown up managing situations without the luxury of drama had built something steady and useful. On the second morning, Harcourt called to confirm the filings were submitted. That afternoon, Andrew came home with a sealed envelope. He placed it in the center of the dining table, where it couldn't be missed. Then he stood back near the kitchen doorway and waited. Pauline came in from the hallway, already talking about something she'd read online, moving the way people move when they're comfortable and unsuspecting, loose and slightly distracted. She looked at the envelope, looked at Andrew, and her expression shifted from mild curiosity to mild irritation. She had the look of someone who assumed this was a bill she'd forgotten or a form from Mary's school that needed signing. "What now?" she said. "Read it," Andrew said. She picked it up with one hand, flipped the flap open with a fingernail, and pulled out the folded pages with the ease of someone who expected nothing from them. She unfolded them and stopped. Andrew watched her read. He watched her eyes move over the first page, slowly at first, then faster, then stopping and going back. He watched her face go through several things in quick succession. Confusion, a hard sort of recognition, the particular expression people have when they realize that something they dismissed as impossible has turned out to be possible and has been proceeding without them. "What is this?" Her voice was different now, smaller, stripped of its usual momentum. "Legal notice," Andrew said. "Read it." From the living room, Colleen's head appeared in the doorway. She had a magazine in her hand. She saw Pauline's face and the open papers, and she came into the room without waiting to be invited, crossing the floor with quick, purposeful steps, and she took the papers out of Pauline's hands without asking. Andrew watched Colleen read. He'd known Colleen Voss for 7 years. In 7 years, he had seen her be dismissive and condescending and occasionally precise in her cruelty. The kind of cruelty that people who value their own image get very good at. The kind that sounds like concern or common sense when you say it out loud, so that no one can ever quite accuse you of it directly. In 7 years, he had seen her smooth and self-assured in every situation he could remember. He had never seen her afraid. She was afraid now. The papers trembled slightly in her hands. Not from emotion. Colleen would not allow that in front of him, but from the small, involuntary tremor of a person whose body is responding to information faster than her composure can keep up. She read the first page, then the second, then went back to the first. Pauline sat down heavily in the dining chair. She set both hands flat on the table, as though the table needed steadying. The silence in the room pressed against the walls. Outside, a car drove past on the street. Somewhere down the block, a child called out to another child. How ordinary things stayed, Andrew thought, right at the moment when something stopped being ordinary for good. Colleen set the papers down on the table and looked at Andrew. Her voice was measured and controlled, but the fear was there under it now, clearly visible to anyone who knew what to look for. "You filed for custody," she said. "Yes," Andrew said. "And you're freezing the trust." "Yes." Pauline raised her head. Her eyes were bright and raw. She looked in that moment like someone who had just understood something she'd been choosing not to understand for a long time. The specific reckoning that comes when you realize that a situation you believe you were managing has actually been managing you. "Andrew, read all of it," he said. "There's more on the second page." He left them there with the papers and the light of the muted television drifting in from the living room. And he went upstairs, and he checked on Mary, and he sat in the chair by her window until she was asleep. Pauline found him in the backyard. It was getting dark. The last of the evening light had gone orange and flat above the fence line. Andrew was sitting on the back deck steps, not doing anything in particular, just sitting the way you sit when you've made a decision that can't be unmade and you're letting the rest of yourself catch up to the weight of it. He heard the back door open. He heard Pauline's steps on the deck boards, tentative, not her usual confident stride. She sat down beside him, not close, leaving a deliberate gap between them, and for a moment neither of them said anything. The yard smelled of cut grass and something damp coming up from the garden beds. "You filed for custody," she said finally. "Yes." A pause. The blue hour deepened. "You're trying to take my daughter." Andrew looked at the yard. The dogwood at the fence line had gone bare. The garden Pauline had started planting 2 summers ago and never returned to was overgrown and tangled, the beds broken by weeds. I'm trying to protect her, he said. From what? Pauline's voice had the sound of something straining against a seam. We're her parents. We live in the same house. She was given a pill, Andrew said. Without my knowledge. Without any prescription. Without anyone knowing what it was or how it would affect her. She is 9 years old. Your mother made the decision. You were in the room. Mary told me you said it was fine. He turned and looked at her. You told our daughter it was fine. Pauline opened her mouth. She closed it again. The back door opened. Colleen stepped out onto the deck. She had changed her demeanor since the dining table. She had regained most of her composure, the reconstruction visible in the set of her shoulders and the careful blankness of her expression. She was the kind of person who could do that, and Andrew had always found it more revealing than the fear itself. This is a dramatic response to a situation that was handled with good intentions, Colleen said. The intentions don't change what happened, Andrew said. She gave a child a mild sedative to help with anxiety. People do this all the time. People who are her doctor might do that, with a prescription and my consent, Andrew said. His voice stayed even and flat. You're not her doctor. You're not her parent. You made a decision about my daughter's body without telling me, without asking me, and you did it because you decided her anxiety was yours to fix. It wasn't yours to fix. Colleen's jaw tightened. You're treating us like we tried to hurt her. I'm treating what happened like what it was, Andrew said, which is that a child in my care was given medication without my knowledge, and her mother approved it, and no one thought to tell me until Mary told me herself. Pauline stood up. She pulled her jacket tighter across her chest, and her voice came out fast and unsteady. This is about the money. You're using this situation to push back on the trust conversation. You're using my mother's mistake as leverage. No, Andrew said. He didn't move. He didn't raise his voice. This is about what you were willing to do for money. The words landed in the space between them like something set down with deliberate weight. Pauline stopped. Colleen went still. Andrew looked at both of them. You want me to believe these are separate things, he said. The trust, the pill, Mary's anxiety, the pressure in this house. I don't believe they're separate. The pressure Colleen has been putting on this family for money drove decisions that affected my daughter's daily life. And when she started showing signs of that stress, the solution was to give her something to calm her down instead of addressing what was causing stress. These are not separate things. He looked at Pauline, and you knew. At every stage, you knew. Pauline sat back down. She pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes, and when she pulled them away, her face was bare and undefended in a way he hadn't seen in a long time. I didn't think it would go this far, she said. Quiet now. The argument out of it. What did you think would happen? Andrew asked. She didn't answer. He went back inside. He checked on Mary. She was asleep, her bag already packed for tomorrow, sitting by the door in a neat, careful way that was entirely her own. He stood at the threshold and looked at her and carried the weight of it. He didn't put it down. It was the right weight to be carrying. The following week moved with the grinding, impersonal momentum of official processes, the kind that doesn't hurry for anyone and doesn't slow for anyone and proceeds with a thoroughness that can feel to the people caught in it, like being disassembled by someone wearing gloves. Harcourt filed the emergency petition on a Monday. By Tuesday, the court had assigned a family services caseworker, a woman named Ms. Aldridge, who wore a lanyard badge and carried a clipboard and had the practiced, careful neutrality of someone who has learned to walk into difficult domestic situations without broadcasting anything that could be read as judgment before all the information is in. She came to the house on Wednesday morning. She spoke with Andrew first. She spoke with Mary separately and privately, and Andrew sat in the kitchen during that portion of the visit and looked out the window at the back fence and drank coffee that had gone cold and thought about the conversation he'd had with Mary the night before. He'd sat on the edge of her bed and told her, as plainly as he knew how, that some adults were going to come and ask her questions about how things had been at home. He told her to tell the truth. He told her nothing she said would get her in trouble. He told her he would be right outside the door. Mary had been quiet for a moment. She'd picked at a loose thread on her comforter, pulling it and releasing it. Then she looked up at him with those careful eyes and said, Simply, "I know, Dad." He hadn't known what she would say to Ms. Aldrich. He hadn't tried to influence it, and he hadn't needed to. When Ms. Aldrich came out of that room, she had 3 additional items on her clipboard that hadn't been there when she went in. The medical records from Dr. Okafor's clinic arrived on Thursday. The panel had found trace amounts of a compound consistent with a class of mild sedative, a formulation typically prescribed to adults for short-term sleep difficulties. In a 9-year-old with no relevant medical history and no prescription, Dr. Okafor had noted in her records that the administration was clinically inappropriate and potentially dangerous, depending on individual metabolic sensitivity. She had also flagged that Mary showed signs consistent with chronic low-grade anxiety, and that while determining the cause was outside the scope of her examination, a high-stress home environment was among the factors she would recommend for follow-up investigation. Andrew read those words carefully. Then he forwarded the complete file to Harcourt's office. Colleen's session with Ms. Aldridge did not go the way she had planned. Andrew wasn't in the room for it, but he heard fragments through the wall. Colleen's carefully modulated tone, her habit of framing every decision she made as an act of care, the smooth confidence of someone who has spent years convincing people that her judgment is reliable. It was just to calm her down. She was anxious. "I used to take the same thing myself. My doctor recommended it years ago." There was no intent to harm. Ms. Aldridge's response was very quiet. It was the kind of quiet that doesn't challenge directly. It simply notes things. Harcourt told Andrew later what Ms. Aldridge had entered into her report. The phrase, "I used to take it myself," had not served as the mitigating factor Colleen had appeared to believe it would. The phrase, "just to calm her down," had been flagged specifically, given that Mary had disclosed, in her private conversation, that her nervousness had increased in the period following her grandmother's arrival and the onset of the financial arguments she had overheard from her bedroom. Ms. Aldridge had noted that the child demonstrated an understanding of the household tension that exceeded what most adults in the situation had apparently attributed to her. Children connect things. They always connect things. It is one of the few reliable facts about children that most adults spend enormous effort trying to forget. Pauline broke on Thursday evening. Andrew came home to find the house unusually quiet. Colleen had left, gone to stay with a friend, apparently, not prepared to be present for what was coming. Pauline was sitting at the dining table with no lights on in the room, just sitting in the gray evening light, her hands folded in front of her, her face stripped of every performance she'd been running for the past several months. It was the most honest he had seen her look in a long time. Andrew set his keys on the counter and sat down across from her. For a while, neither of them said anything. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere outside, a car alarm went off briefly and then stopped. "I didn't think it would go this far," Pauline said. Her voice was very small. "Not broken. Something smaller than broken. Emptied." "You said that already," Andrew said. She nodded. "I know." A long pause. "I knew she gave Mary something. I was in the kitchen. I watched her do it. I told Mary it was fine because I was tired. I was tired of my mother calling me every day about money, tired of the arguments with you about the trust, tired of everything pulling at me. And I just told myself it was fine because taking the easier road felt like something I was owed." She pressed her hands flat on the table. "I know that doesn't fix it. I know that's not enough." Andrew looked at her across the table. He thought about the woman he had married, the person she'd been before Colleen moved in, before the pressure had accumulated to the point where Pauline was making decisions that protected her own exhaustion rather than her daughter. He thought about whether the woman in front of him was someone who had made bad choices under pressure, or someone who had simply revealed, under pressure, what she actually was. He didn't know, and he'd stopped trying to decide, because the truth was it didn't change anything now. "Mary checked her zipper 3 times this morning," he said. "Every morning, every day, for the past 2 months. Because she's anxious. Because she's been living in an anxious house, and she's been absorbing it, the way children absorb everything they live in. And instead of someone saying, 'Let's make this house calmer. Let's protect her from what's happening between the adults,' your mother gave her a pill." Pauline looked down at the table. "I know." "No," Andrew said, not unkindly, just accurately. "I don't think you knew. I think you chose not to know. And that's its own kind of decision." She didn't answer that. The room held the silence between them, the way a room holds the last moment of something, the specific final quiet that marks the point at which a thing is over, not dramatically and not loudly, but in the way things actually end, slowly, and with both people understanding it before either of them says it. Andrew got up. He went to check on Mary, who was asleep with one arm across her homework notebook, her pencils lined up along the edge of her nightstand. He moved the notebook to the desk, turned off the light, and stood for a moment in the doorway. He went to bed. The legal process moved on its own schedule, and Andrew had learned, somewhere in the course of this, not to fight that. He let Harcourt manage the procedural details. He focused on what was in front of him, Mary's routine, his own steadiness, the daily acts of showing up that mattered more than any single dramatic gesture. The charges against Colleen arrived through the district attorney's office on a Thursday morning. Child endangerment. The specifics involve the administration of a controlled substance to a minor without prescription or parental consent, compounded by the documented evidence that this had occurred within a pattern of financially motivated conduct. The trust access demands, Colleen's debt history, the caseworker's report. The charges did not require Andrew to do anything further. The process had its own weight now. Andrew was at work when Harcourt called. He stepped out of a meeting to take it. Colleen was charged this morning, Harcourt said. Arraignment is next week. The family court receives the financial misconduct findings related to Pauline's role in the trust access attempts next Monday. We're on track. Okay, Andrew said. Are you all right? Harcourt asked. He wasn't the kind of lawyer who asked that often, which made it more notable when he did. Andrew considered the question honestly. Yeah, he said. I'm all right. He wasn't happy. He wanted to be precise about that, even if only to himself. Nothing in what was happening felt like a victory. The law moving in a direction that protected his daughter was not the same thing as satisfaction. It was something else. Relief, maybe the specific, exhausted relief of a person who has been holding something together alone for a long time and finally feels it hold on its own. And underneath the relief, something sadder and harder to name. The knowledge that a marriage had ended not in a single dramatic moment, but in the accumulated weight of smaller moments, each one a choice someone made to protect the wrong thing. The day the family court finalized the primary custody arrangement, Pauline came to find him. He was loading boxes into his car. He'd signed a lease on a smaller apartment the week before, closer to Mary's school, 2 bedrooms, clean and simple and very much his own. He'd been doing the move in stages, carrying things out in the mornings while Mary was at school, giving the house time to adjust to what it was becoming without making it dramatic for anyone. Pauline came out the front door and stood on the porch. Andrew. He closed the trunk of the car and looked up at her. She came down the porch steps slowly. She was crying quietly with the steady, unhurried quality of someone who has been crying off and on for several days and has stopped trying to control when it happens. She stood in front of him on the front walk with her hands at her sides. Please, she said. I know I don't have the right to ask. I know what I did. But please, tell me there's some way to fix this. Some version of this where we don't. No, Andrew said. Her face changed. You had chances, he said. Not one. Not a single misstep that you didn't have the opportunity to correct. I sat at that table with you and told you that trust was not ours to use. You had a chance to say, you're right, we'll find another way. You didn't take it. Your mother had a chance to come to me if she was worried about Mary's anxiety. She didn't. You had a chance to tell me the same morning it happened, before Mary told me, before the clinic, before any of this was set in motion. You didn't take it. He met her eyes steadily. Every decision point, you made the wrong choice. Not maliciously, but consistently. Pauline was crying in earnest now. I know all of that. Her voice was barely above a whisper. But she needs her mother. The court agrees, Andrew said. You have visitation. That's what you have. It's not nothing. He picked up the last bag from the front walk. Use it well. He put the bag in the back seat. He got in the car. He pulled out of the driveway of the house on Birchwood Drive for the last time. He didn't look in the rearview mirror, not as a performance of resolve, not to prove something. He didn't look because there was nothing behind him that he needed to see. The road ahead went toward an elementary school, toward a 2-bedroom apartment, toward a daughter who was waiting for him to come home. That was all there was. That was enough. The apartment on Sycamore Street had 800 square feet, a kitchen that got good morning light through east-facing windows, and a balcony too small for much besides 2 chairs and a ceramic pot in which Mary had installed a plant she'd rescued from the clearance rack at the grocery store. She named it Gerald. It was, by any reasonable assessment, an unremarkable plant. It was thriving. 3 months passed. They developed a rhythm the way most routines develop, not through deliberate design, but through repetition, until the repetition starts to feel like the shape of things. Andrew dropped Mary at school every morning. He picked her up 4 afternoons a week. On Wednesdays, she went to Pauline's, and on alternating weekends. The Wednesday transfers required a handoff in a parking lot halfway between the 2 households, and Andrew had learned to read, in the first few seconds of seeing Mary walk toward him afterward, how the visit had gone. The first few Wednesdays, she came back quiet. Not Mary's regular quiet. Something more careful, a held quality, like she was managing something she wasn't sure was safe to put down yet. Andrew would make dinner and not ask too many questions and let her tell him what she needed to tell him in her own time. He would listen without commentary and pass the bread and ask what she wanted to do after dinner. And gradually, over the course of an evening, she would decompress. By the 6th or 7th Wednesday, that quality was gone. She came back from Pauline's and walked into the apartment and dropped her backpack in the hallway and said, "What's for dinner?" with the ordinary, careless confidence of a child who knows where home is. Andrew had been at the stove. He'd kept his back to her and given himself a moment. "Pasta," he'd said. "Again," she'd said. "Yes, again." She'd sighed dramatically and gone to change out of her school clothes, and Andrew had turned back to the stove and felt, quietly, like a person who has made a correct decision. He started noticing other things. Small things, but the kind that accumulate into something you can finally name. Mary stopped triple-checking her zipper. He noticed it one Tuesday morning in early December. She lined up her pencils once, the quick automatic habit still there, and then she zipped her bag and picked it up without a second pass. She talked through breakfast with her usual, half-distracted focus. And when he dropped her at school, she waved at him from the entrance without looking back. Not dismissively, just easily. The way children wave when they're comfortable enough to leave. He drove away from school and spent the rest of the morning in a meeting about shipping logistics, and he thought about his zipper check. Colleen's case moved through the courts without fanfare. Her attorney argued mitigating intent at sentencing. The judge noted that intent does not substitute for consent, and that the welfare of the child in question had been demonstrably affected by the household environment in which these decisions were made. Colleen received a suspended sentence, 2 years of probation, mandatory family education classes, and a formal record. She moved back to her own apartment before the case concluded. The relationship between Colleen and Pauline survived, as far as Andrew understood, but in a reduced and careful form. The kind of relationship that happens when a shared crisis binding 2 people dissolves and they discover that the bond was thinner than they'd thought. Pauline's financial misconduct finding, tied to her role in the trust access attempts, resulted in a formal court restriction on any contact with Mary's trust fund without explicit judicial approval, and a transparency requirement written into the co-parenting agreement that Harcourt had drafted himself in language precise enough to survive any future attempt at interpretation. The trust remained intact. Andrew paid the legal fees in 3 installments, over 4 months, without resentment. They were the cost of what he'd protected. He thought sometimes about what a person gives up when they decide to stop being polite about something important. There's a version of the story where he says nothing about the zipper checks, accepts the pill incident as a mistake and moves on, avoids the confrontation, keeps the peace. That version of the story ends somewhere worse. He didn't know exactly where, but worse. He thought about his father in the sheet metal shop. 31 years of daily discipline, no drama, no self-pity. He'd never heard his father say he was tough or proud or any of the words men use when they want credit for endurance. He just did what the situation required and came home. Andrew had tried to be that kind of person. On a Thursday evening in late autumn, he and Mary were sitting on the balcony after dinner. The sky had gone a pale, burnt orange at the edges, fading fast. Gerald the plant sat between the 2 chairs, unremarkable and present. Mary had her feet up on the lower railing and a cup of hot chocolate going cold in her lap. She was watching the street below with the easy, unhurried quality she'd redeveloped over the past few months. The comfortable attention of a child who doesn't need to be vigilant. Dad, yeah, she thought for a moment. Below them, a woman walked a dog along the sidewalk, and the dog stopped to investigate something in the gutter and had to be urged along. Are we okay now? She asked. Andrew looked at her. He took his time with it. He looked at the way she held her cup loosely without gripping it. He looked at the easy cross of her ankles. He looked at the way she'd asked the question, not with fear behind it, not as a test, but with the genuine, curious confidence of someone checking on something she already half expected to hear confirmed. He nodded. Yeah, we are. Mary leaned over and rested her head against his arm, the way she'd done when she was much smaller, and they sat like that while the light went out of the sky. There was no fanfare in it, no relief large enough to demand naming. Just the ordinary accumulated feeling of things being all right. The quiet weight of a life reasserting itself, finding its level, settling. Andrew didn't feel victorious. He didn't think about Pauline with satisfaction or about Colleen with contempt. He thought about a morning that felt farther away now than the calendar said it was, standing at the kitchen sink, watching a 9-year-old press her thumb along a zipper for the third time, and understanding in that moment that something needed to be done. He thought about the clarity that had come instead of anger. How useful it had turned out to be. How much easier it was to do the right thing when you were certain, without the noise of emotion blurring the line. He hadn't fought for money. He hadn't fought to be right. He hadn't fought to make anyone suffer, or to win an argument that had been bothering him for months, or to prove something about himself. He'd fought because his daughter was worth fighting for, not as a sentiment, not as something you say when you want to sound like a good father, but as the single fixed, unmoving fact at the center of every choice he'd made from the moment he understood what was at stake. Mary shifted against his arm, settling more deeply into the warmth of it. He let her. Below them, the street went quiet. The last of the light disappeared behind the buildings to the west. Gerald the plant stood between the chairs, doing fine. The sky went dark slowly and without drama, the way good things end, leaving behind only what was always meant to remain.